In this video, we are going to do a lapped zipper. And again, I am following the instructions from the Complete Guide to Sewing because I really love how all of their zipper applications are done in this book. So you're gonna need for your sample a zipper. This one is unlike the centered zipper. It is a normal zipper with a regular zipper stop. It has not been shortened at all. This one also has the, oh, this one doesn't. Huh. This one doesn't have the stitch guide on here. That's okay. If you have a zipper that for some reason does not have a zipper guide, then the zipper guide is essentially in the middle of the zipper tape. So we're just gonna aim for that. Again, you're gonna need 2 pieces of fabric that are at least 3 to 4 inches longer than your zipper. The top of the zipper has been trimmed off, but that's okay. And when we lay the zipper in, we're gonna line it up here. So step 1 is just like the centered zipper. We're gonna pin these pieces together. And this time, I'm actually gonna sew from the bottom to the top. I'm gonna do it the right direction. Again, with every type of zipper application, you always want to start from the bottom going towards the top. That allows the fabric to lay the right direction, because if you try to sew 2 different directions on here, you're gonna end up with weird bubbles in your fabric. Okay, so I've pinned this, now I'm gonna mark it. This is actually the top, this end. Because that's the direction my pins are facing. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did before. I'm gonna line up the top of the zipper tape with the top edge of my fabric. I'm gonna lay it right next to my stitch line. This is the zipper stop. This is what prevents the zipper from going down further, and you can tell it opens up right here. So I want to visually mark across right below where that zipper stop is. So whenever I go to sew across this, I'm not sewing on top of the zipper stop. All right, so from here to the top, just like the centered zipper, we're gonna do a baste. And from here on the bottom, we're gonna do a normal stitch length. Okay? So let's get this in the machine. With doing zippers, there's a lot of changing your stitch length, so make sure you take the time to triple check that you are doing the correct stitch length. So now I'm sewing from what would be the bottom of the garment, if this was a garment instead of just a sample piece. And I am at a normal stitch length. And I'm gonna back stitch, just like always. Come on, thread, get under the foot. Change my speed. I'm gonna come up to this notch that I have marked that is the length of my zipper. And I'm gonna back stitch from there. And then change my stitch length so the largest length your machine can do. And I'm basting. In the centered zipper, I did not backstitch at the top of the basting section. I'm going to do that on here because it wanted to open up on the other sample. Doesn't matter if you do backstitch at the top of the bottom. So from the top to this line is a basting stitch length, and this is a normal stitch length. For the lap zipper, we start applying it very similarly to the centered zipper, so I'm gonna go press this seam open to do the next step. Okay, so I have pressed this seam open and transferred my mark just like I did on the centered zipper, and I'm going to follow the next step, which is to lay my zipper face down, line up the top edge with the top of my fabric, and I'm gonna follow the side that the sewing guide shows, which is this side. So I'm gonna flip that under. I'm gonna make a slight change from what they're doing in the book, and I'm gonna go ahead and open this zipper. So the illustration shows you doing this step with the zipper closed, but I wanna do it just like I did before with the centered zipper. Line up the teeth with this stitch edge. Yeah, this with the seam line. I said that, and then my brain went, that sounded wrong. Pin this in place, again, pinning toward the bottom because I'm going to sew from the bottom to the top. So this tape does not have a stitch line, so I am just going to eyeball it and sew in the middle of this width, okay? Let me get all of this in place. There we go. Okay, let's take this to the sewing machine. Okay, just like before, I'm gonna change out my presser foot, put on my zipper foot. I want my zipper foot placed on this side of the machine. I'm going to change my stitch length up to a 5, the basting length. I'm going to base this to just the seam allowance, just like I did on the centered zipper. Go and back stitch because it makes me feel better. On your zippers, you're gonna follow the stitch line. Mine does not because I grabbed a scrap zipper that apparently is old enough to not have a stitch guide. So I'm just sewing in the middle. And I'm gonna back stitch here. Okay, cut my threads. Now this is where the instructions start to deviate from doing a centered zipper to a lapped zipper, all right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my zipper foot to the opposite side, so I don't forget to do that. I am going to close up my zipper, and then I'm going to fold, let's see if I can fold this out and back like that. So you can see the stitch line has moved over. We've got a little fold right here next to the zipper. And we're gonna stitch from the bottom up to the top. So I'm actually gonna pin this in place. It's tricky. So this is what you were sewing before. You were holding it like this. Now you're gonna flip all of the fabric the opposite direction. Just like this. And I'm gonna pin this in place, stitch from the bottom. And I am only catching the seam allowance line. So there's a fold here that we have created. This is what's going to create the lapped zipper. You want the fold to come up to the teeth, but you do not want it to go over the teeth. If you're following the stitch line on your zipper, it should not fold over. Okay. All right, just like that. I'll show you the back so you can kind of see what's happening here. All right. Now we're going to stitch on this fold right next to the folded edge. This is, let me double check. I want this to be a regular stitch length. I always want to keep this a baste, but it is not a baste. It is a regular stitch length. Back stitch. Be careful when you're sewing that you do not sew over your seam line that's here. You want to stitch right next to the edge of that fold. Okay, so now what this step has done is it is forcing the zipper to be pulled to one side of this seam. That is what's going to make this a lap zipper. So if we open this back up and you feel the zipper teeth are right here, right underneath my nail. And there's the stitch line. So this is how this makes this a lapped zipper. Okay, so the next step that we need to do is to do some hand basting. So let me prep my thread for that. Okay, so according to the book, we're gonna press this nice and flat. The zipper teeth are right here. The instructions say to baste on the opposite side about 1/2 inch from the seam line. That's this line. So I'm gonna draw that in. But before I draw, I'm gonna do some poking around, feeling, yes, the zipper teeth are under the ruler. So, where is the bottom mark here? It's right, stop is there. Okay. So this is my basting line that I'm drawing on. Oop, there's a little section right here that did not show up very well. Now, if you were doing this for a garment, I've done this with a pencil for the samples so that you can see the lines really clearly. But if you were sewing on a garment and you wanted to actually draw these lines on, you would need to use something that is erasable, like a Frixion pen. Okay. By the time I get up here to the top where the head of the zipper is, that line is right next to the zipper. So I'm gonna kind of pull this over and pin it so that my stitch line is not on that zipper head. Okay, so I'm gonna baste kind of like I did before. And I'm going to just do a tailor's tack right here. I'm basting through all of the layers. With this one, since this zipper actually has a zipper stop, I am starting this basting line below that zipper stop because I don't want my machine to have to go over the teeth of the machine. I don't want my machine to go over the teeth of the zipper. All right. Baste. And as you are basting, make sure that you're feeling with your fingers between all the layers to make sure that the teeth are between your basting line and the seam line. If it's not, then you need to move your basting line over. That is right next to the zipper teeth. Okay. So I can tell as I am basting, my zipper teeth through all of these layers, you can't see it, but I can feel it, is right next to this line. So when I go to sew this by machine, I know that I want to be on the outside of this line, because if I'm on the inside of this line, I'm going to hit the zipper teeth. Get that pin out of my way. There we go. Do one back stitch just to hold this in place. That also makes this basting easier to remove on a garment. Okay, one final check, feeling, making sure that my basting and my zipper teeth are not on top of each other. Okay, so now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to start here, because you always start from the bottom, work to the top, and stitch right next to the basting line on the outside edge. Because this is muslin and you can see through all of the layers, I can tell that I have a very narrow amount of fabric to catch all of the layers between my basting and where the seam allowance on the inside lands. So be really careful if you can see that you are hitting through all of those layers. Okay, let me get up to the sewing machine. Okay, so I need to change which side my zipper foot is on. Go. Okay, and I am starting on the outside edge of this basting line. My zipper stop is right here, so I know I'm not gonna hit it, so I can just go right ahead. For a nice clean bottom, I like to make sure that my needle, I will actually turn it by hand, is on this seam line. Go forward, back stitch, turn my corner, and stitch right next to my basting line. And I'm gonna just kind of with my fingers push that zipper head out of the way. Pull this off. That back stitching's a little crooked because the zipper head was in the way. I could have pushed the zipper head further down to get it out of my way. Trim my threads, and we're almost done. Now we just have to open up where we basted before in order to make this zipper open. Start at the bottom, open this up. And now you can see this overlaps the zipper. That's what makes this a lapped zipper. So the seam of the fabric is hiding the zipper tape. And again, we always want to check and make sure our zipper functions by opening and closing it, and pull out all of your little threads. And that is a lapped zipper application. I do want you to leave the basting in for your sample. If this was a real garment, you'd take that thread out. That's it. That's how you do a lapped zipper.